Well, last time I saw you, I had a real busy afternoon's roach fishing. And since that session, the weather has been dreadful, really. We've had heavy snow and parts of the lake have been frozen over. But it's now a lot warmer and there's a strong southwesterly wind, and I'm hoping for a few more roach today. I guess I've had the rods out about 30 to 40 minutes. No signs of life yet, but it can be a little bit slow to begin with. So I'll keep recasting these feeders and dropping the odd spommer bait over the top, and hopefully we can get stuck into the roach today. Although the lake looks really nice in the snow, it certainly can slow the fishing up. I did try and catch a snow carp, but no signs of life. That really cold weather does put them down a bit, but I'd say we've got 9 or 10 degrees today, so hopefully the roach will come back on the feed. I've decided to go back in the same swim as last time. I think it'd be silly not to. I had so many bites last time, and I think with roach fishing I tend to get drawn to the same swims. It's I guess when you keep catching in the same spot, it's difficult to stray elsewhere. The roach are quite distinctive when they roll. They're almost a bit like a tench when they roll, quite a splashy fish when they surface. But what you have to remember at Homersfield is quite often some of the roach are bigger than some of the tench. It's quite important to keep recasting the feeders with this style of roach fishing, and they've been at about 15 or 20 minutes without a bite, so I'm gonna have them in, fill the feeders up and put them back out again. I'm having to give this quite a big cast today with this crosswind. It's making fishing quite difficult, but they are good conditions for the roach when it's windy, so it's in the line clip, so it lands on the same spot every time. And I've got a couple of far bank markers that I aim for. Probably not as neat as it would normally be with this crosswind, but near enough. Well, I'm going to put 3 or 4 spoms out over the top of the feeders just to try and jump start the swim. I sometimes find by just trickling a bit more bait through the swim that can encourage them to start feeding. So I've got a mixture of maggots and whole and crumbled mini boilies in here. One point worth mentioning is my spod rod is clipped up probably about half a rod length shorter than the fishing rods. And the reason for that, when you hit the clip on the feeder, it doesn't sink straight down in a straight line, it will swing towards you slightly, so I allow a little bit of distance for the feeders to swing in. But I'm sure on a day like today when it's this windy, there's a lot of undertow and you get quite a spread of bait anyhow. One of the questions I quite often get asked about this style of roach fishing, especially on a pit the size of Homersfield, it's over 30 acres Homersfield, is where do you start for these big roach? Well, probably my best tip would be to walk around at dawn and dusk, because the roach, like I've said before, they will show themselves. Normally at that time of day, at first light or at last light, they're quite distinctive. They'll normally show in numbers, and that'll give you your biggest clue where to go. I guess the perfect spot would be some nice deep gravelly areas. They tend to be in the middle of the lake at Homersfield, and although I do catch a few fish out of the bays and the corners of the lake, those big roach do like the centre part of the lake. So I've jumped in this swim this morning. I've started off with 5 or 6 spoms of bait, and I keep recasting the feeders every 20 minutes or so. It's a little and often approach with the bait, and you just keep building the swim to try and get your first bite. Fishing very accurate, I feel, is important. I keep the line in the line clips. If I do hook a rogue carp or tench, I'm quite confident I can unclip the line whilst playing it. But I guess my guideline would be an area about the size of a snooker table to keep the feeders going in roughly the same spot and the spoms over the top. I do fish my spom rod a little bit shorter than my fishing rods because I feel the feeders will swing in on a tight line slightly when you're sinking them. Again, just keep recasting the feeders every 20 or 30 minutes until you get that first bite. One other thing I really enjoy about the winter fishing is sometimes it can be very challenging, and when something's quite hard to achieve, that moment when you achieve it is all the more satisfying. So whether it's targeting a big roach, a big pike or a big chub, I quite like a bit of a challenge, if I'm honest. So winter fishing ticks all the boxes for me sometimes. But I guess being an all-round angler, there's just so many good fishing opportunities. Whether it's the big roach here at Homersfield or chub fishing on the rivers, as each month goes past, there's always something different to target. Another one of the plus points is generally the venues are much quieter and you can get in the better swims. But I like all the seasons, and I like winter as much as I like the spring, if I'm honest.
Obviously, when winter comes, things change at the lake. It allows us to do some maintenance work around the lake. We've planted an awful lot of trees here at the very beginning. Those trees are now really mature and some need to be taken down. There's lots of willows here that have to be cut back, or they're dying and need to be taken out. So there's general maintenance all the time around the lake, and the winter time gives us a chance to do that. One of the biggest problems we've had is a huge rise in the water level. It's most probably at its highest that it's ever been. That brings problems because it floods the swims, it washes the swims away. Something that we can't really do anything to until the water levels go down. We're finding now that the climate is changing. We're getting a lot more water in the valley, and the whole lake is based on the level of the River Waveney. Therefore, if the valley is full of water, the level of the lake rises high as well. And this year especially has been exceptionally bad. Again, this year we've also had quite a lot of snow in this part of the country. The lake partially iced over. In the past, when we've had the lake frozen over, one of the things we have to be very aware of is making sure that we pump areas where we keep the lake free from ice. It helps to allow the gases to escape from the water, and also to put oxygen into the lake. This year we had quite a lot of heavy snow. Again, when that melts, it's bringing up the levels of the lake. Our biggest thing here this year has been the increased amount of water that's coming to the lake. Of course, 2020 is going to be remembered for the pandemic, COVID-19. It's affected everybody and it's affected fisheries. So our members obviously were restricted to how often they could come here. The whole lake had to be closed for 3 months, and strangely enough it virtually was like having an old closed season. And again, it didn't get lifted until May the 27th, I think, if I remember rightly. And the one thing it did do is it allowed the lake to rest. And what we noticed here was that it allowed the fish to spawn peacefully, naturally, and all around the lake, and it happened very quickly. So in some respects, although obviously the pandemic was a terrible thing and still is, as a lake, it allowed the lake to go back to the ways it was. And it actually reminded me of the old days from when we had Waveney Valley Lakes and our other fisheries, when we used to have a closed season for 3 months. And there was a reason for that. It allowed the lake to rest, the fish to behave naturally, to spawn without any pressure being put on them. And in my mind, that's not a bad thing at all.
Well, I don't think the roach have read the rule books today, because I really like these conditions. It's a very strong southwesterly wind. It's proper hold on to your hat weather, but I still haven't had a bite as yet. Could be one of those days when they come on the feed later in the day, but I certainly don't mind this strong wind. It normally stirs them up a bit. Fishing for these roach can be quite challenging when it's as windy as this, because I'm trying to keep as accurate as I can, but with this crosswind coming through, casting the feeders on the same spot is a little bit trickier than normal. It goes the same with a spommon. You've got to keep the bait going out, but you just have to work the gear a bit harder. I think one of my favourite features about this particular area of the lake is the nice deep gravel area. And just before it drops off into the gravel, it's very shallow close in here, and I think a combination of that gravel and the drop off, it just seems a bit of a magnet for these big roach. I find when it gets really cold in the winter time, the roach tend to shoal up in 2 or 3 different areas, and these deep gravel areas in the centre of the lake is definitely the features I look for, and that's exactly what we've got out here. We've probably got 11, 12 foot of water with gravel, which is the perfect presentation really. When it's as windy as this, on a lake as big as this, it definitely causes a lot of undertow, and you have to bear that in mind. When you're spodding bait out, such as maggots and boilie crumb, it's probably going to be blowing all over the place. So on days like this, I probably feed a bit more using the feeders rather than the spom, because you know they're going straight to the bottom and carrying the food straight down. Generally, when you get these strong southwesterly winds and mild weather in the winter time, it can move the fish about a bit. They'll normally move on the end of these winds, so it's coming straight into this swim. It's making it quite difficult to cast the feeders out, but I'm quietly confident that the roach will start feeding at some point. Sometimes you find in the winter time the roach feed much better later in the day. The conditions improved immensely. We had a huge southerly wind and temperatures into double figures. So for a change, I thought I'd just fish with one rod on the quiver tip, and from there on, pretty much as soon as I tightened up every cast, I was catching some lovely roach. The average size, probably 12 ounces to a pound, and I'm pretty sure there was a couple of 2-pound fish putting in an appearance as well. It was really good fun fishing, and it just goes to prove that a couple of hours at the right time of day is better than sitting there at the wrong time of the day. I can remember my first ever winter on the lake. I notched up 67 roach over the magic 2-pound mark and 15 threes. And if I'm honest, the following spring it got even better, and I had 15 threes in 4 separate day sessions. It is roach fishing to die for. This year we've got lots of the 1.5 to 2-pound fish. To be honest, a pound is your average fish this year, but I can guarantee there's certainly 2s and 3-pounders to be caught as well. And I'd eat my hat if there isn't a British record roach in Homersfield Lake. I believe it's done 3 different 4-pound roach now, but it is definitely a roach fisherman's dream. I'd almost describe it as a roach factory. New fish are coming through every year, and big fish are coming through every year. After a very hectic 2-hour evening spell, I probably got 30 to 40 roach in the keep net. The pick of the bunch were 2 fish that were probably around the 2-pound mark. It may sound a little bit blasé that I didn't weigh them, but I've been spoilt rotten with big roach at Homersfield Lake, and I just enjoy catching them of all sizes sometimes. I really enjoyed that evening's quiver tipping for the big roach. But if I'm honest, temperatures were starting to rise. We were seeing double-figure temperatures most days, and it felt like the right time to put the roach rods away and get the carp rods out. I'd felt really pleased to catch a few carp in the colder months, but if I'm honest, there was a pattern, and when I'd caught carp in the middle of winter, it was normally when the weather had fell right on them slightly more mild days. And those mild days were being more and more frequent now. So that first morning back, it was looking fairly quiet. I hadn't seen any fish show. It was cold, it was windy, and I was almost thinking about throwing the towel in about lunchtime. And then all of a sudden the wind dropped, the sun came out, I took my coat off, and I'd seen, whether it was the same fish 3 times, but I'd seen some fish started to show, started getting a few liners, and I felt it had to happen. It looked perfect all of a sudden. And it wasn't too long after that when the bobbin pulled up, the rod tip pulled round, and there was something special on the end. The beauty of fishing here is you're still fishing for the unknown. When I picked the rod up, if I'm honest, I was just pleased to get a carp. Little did I know what was on the other end. It felt a heavy fish, a lot slower and a lot more determined when I was fighting it. When it popped up a short distance out from the margin, I could see it was a really special fish. After a bit of bumbling with the net and a little bit of panicking, I was soon staring down at a 43-pound, 4-ounce common carp. And I think for me, what made it even more special is when myself and Martin had that fish on the bank, neither of us recognised it. You know, how often does a 40-pound common carp just turn up out of the blue? We certainly haven't seen that caught at any big weights before. It was a real special fish and one of the lake's real rare fish. It's all too easy for carp to go long periods of time without being caught. To catch every single carp in the lake, you'd have to get an awful lot of bites. And I mean, for instance, one of the larger common carp here, you know, it's normally hovering around mid-upper 50s. I can remember, I think it was probably 4 years between it being caught. You know, and if that fish can go 4 years between being caught, who knows what else is out there that hasn't been caught for 10 years, 15 years. There's definitely some mystery about the lake.
So in 1962, my father had brought what was to become Waveney Valley Lakes Caravan Park. He had had a busy year that year. He'd also started his own timber company called MV Simmons Forestry Limited, and I'd come along. So he had lots going on at that time. So in 1963, he took more time in looking at what he was going to do with these lakes and ballast land that he'd purchased. We used to go up there every weekend. Friday evenings I was bundled into the back of a car, driven up the 2.5–3 hour journey at those days to go up there, and he started to develop it. The story goes is that he used to walk around the lakes, and in those days there were always a few anglers fishing the lakes for whatever was in the lakes at the time being. Mainly I think it was roach, tench, rudd and bream. He went up to anglers at the time and he would say what did they like to catch, and to be honest I think a lot of the anglers wanted to catch bigger fish. When you go back even a few years into the 50s, from Richard Walker's 44-pound common carp from Redmire, people had started to look towards carp fishing or wanting to catch carp. At the time roach fishing was the #1 fish to catch in the UK. But roach only got up to 1.5–2 pounds. 2 pound fish was an exceptional fish back then. So to catch anything bigger was something special. So most of these anglers, or some of the people that my dad spoke to, said they'd like to catch carp. And when my dad realised it was carp that anglers wanted to catch, it was from this moment onwards that our lives changed forever.